The term apartheid stems from the Afrikaans word for apartness. It was the ideology supported by the National Party government and was introduced in South Africa in 1948. Apartheid called for separate development of the different racial groups in South Africa. It made laws that forced the different racial groups to live and develop separately.
How did the new government enforce this new policy? The implementation of the policy, later referred to as separate development, was made possible by the Population Registration Act of 1950, which put all South Africans into four racial categories: Bantu, white, colored, and Asian.
The Group Areas Act of 1950. Under this act, the cities and towns of South Africa were divided into segregated residential and business areas. Thousands of coloreds, blacks, and Indians were removed from areas classified for white occupation. The Group Areas Act and the Land Act maintained residential segregation.
The Land Acts of 1954 and 1955. This act restricted non-white residents to specific areas. These laws further restricted the already limited right of Black Americans to own land, entrenching the white minority's control of over 80% of South African land. It permitted the removal of blacks from any area within and next to the magisterial district of Johannesburg by the South African government.
Other laws. Other laws prohibited most social interaction between the races, enforced the segregation of public facilities, including education, created race-specific jobs, limited the powers of non-white unions, and minimized non-white participation in government. Many Black Africans had to leave their houses and businesses to move into impoverished conditions.
The Bantu Education Act. This act was aimed at training the children for the manual labor and menial jobs that the government deemed suitable for those of their race, and it was explicitly intended to inculcate the idea that Black people were to accept being subservient to white South Africans.
Student Uprising of 1976. Black students were forced to learn in Afrikaans, which is a West Germanic language. Protests against Afrikaans started. In result, more than 500 black students were killed by white policemen and more than 1,000 men, women, and children wounded. From 1976 to 1990, such headlines were commonplace in South African newspapers.
Enforcement. The government enforced apartheid ruthlessly. Black people had to carry a pass giving them permission to travel in white areas, and these passes would only be permitted for the purposes of going to and from work. Torture and abuse by the police was commonplace and condoned as necessary to control any opposition or defiance.
People respond. There were widespread attempts to protest against the apartheid system. A number of Black political groups, often supported by sympathetic whites, opposed apartheid using a variety of tactics, including violence, strikes, demonstrations, and sabotage, strategies that often met with severe consequences from the government.
The end of apartheid. President de Klerk worked from within the government to end apartheid, while Mandela resumed his positions as president of the African National Congress and worked to end apartheid from the outside. In 1993, de Klerk and Mandela shared the Nobel Peace Prize for moving the country peacefully to a non-racial democracy.